Thank you very much. Let's go to some of your questions, and I know we have some questions all set to go now. Lots of hands, right? Let's go to the first question right back here. Yes, sir.
This question is two questions. One, Jack and Dee. Right now you said it's easy to move someone else, but what's the debt ratio? Hey, you're only paying $7,000 a year now, but when I went to college 30 years ago, 1 out of 10 moved home. Now 4 out of 10 move home out of college, and I'm funding them anyways. How do you do that ratio? You're saying, hey, it's coming back now. How do you pay for that? And the next question is private high school worth the expense now, or is college worth the expense? Where's the balance point of, hey, you make $50,000 to $70,000, what's the best way to spend your money?
Let me start with the second part of the question, which is, is it worth the money? I think that is actually a key question that every parent should ask, and that goes to what Joe's suggestion about value. You really have to ask that question, and I asked that of my own children. My son that just went off to college last year, he was very interested in going to an Ivy League school. They were not offering him any financial aid. I said, why don't you go there for graduate school? Because you're an engineer and they're going to pay for your graduate school. And instead, why don't you consider making this value decision of going to this very outstanding other school, which will set you up. I mean, I think we have to make decisions like that. I think parents have to make decisions about the private school, whether it's worth it. I think they have to make decisions about the college that they go to, and based upon the financial aid, public or private. And you have to, you have to ask those kinds of questions. As far as loans go, I agree with Dee that it's reasonable to expect students to take on some debt burden. But what we do see is that those first generation kids have a harder time with that. And so for that reason, we've looked at any income below the median income range. And what we've done last year, 2 years ago actually, we decided that those students, we would try to meet their financial need on the data that I gave you based upon grants and scholarships rather than loans. So that the students that are kind of less able to kind of understand what it means to take out a $15,000 loan for your college would not have to do that. But I do think it's reasonable for a student to assume part of the debt burden, but I also agree, I think Dee's advice was very, very good, and Kim's also on borrowing, being very careful where you get your loans and what you take on.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the question also was, are private high schools worth it? Is that what you asked?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are private high schools worth the cost? Maybe people would want to save and pay for college instead. Joe?
It's hard to have an academic response to that. I think it varies tremendously based upon the family, based upon the student, based upon where you live and what other options are available. So anyone sitting here would be able to talk about their own kids and their high school experience. May have a terrific public high school there, and there may be families there who choose to send their kids to a private school for a variety of reasons. So I think it's a tough one to get into the value propositions because it's so context dependent, to be honest with you.
The cost and value, obviously, that equation can be applied to high school as well.
Yeah.
Kim?
Right. Well, I talked to a lot of admissions officers, and basically what they want to see from each student is that they will succeed in college. So if you're going to go to a very rigorous private high school that's really going to prepare them, they're going to get an AP course in their junior year, they're going to pass it, they're going to do something that will show colleges that they will succeed in college, then they'll certainly have more opportunities of college choices, and they'll probably get more aid because they'll be a very desirable student. We all know that teens are very affected by peer pressure, so if they're in a bad situation in a public school and they're surrounded by kids who aren't studying and are goofing off, and at this other school they would be surrounded by kids who are studying and are aimed at college, then that might be worth it. So it really depends on your individual situation, but it's certainly true that the more prepared the student is in high school, the more opportunities for aid and college choice that they will have.
Well, I really don't have too much more to add, especially on the private education. It depends on the student. There are a lot of financial aid for some of the private schools. If you look at a school like Phillips in Andover, it's got the largest endowment fund of any of the private schools around the country. So many of these schools have the money to give kids scholarships. And again, as Kim said, they're now in an environment where college is a given, where AP courses are a given. So the whole learning environment changes. So for some kids, it may be worthwhile. And there may be special needs for the kids, too. Again, classes of 10 or 12 versus classes of 25 or 35.
Thank you for that excellent question. We have a question right over here. Yes.
I'm wondering what colleges are doing to keep their costs down and the rising tuition from year to year. It seems like it's a 5% increase every year. And, when you're saying don't look at the sticker price, but colleges are increasing their fees every year by 5% or so, then you're looking in 7 years when my daughter is a senior in college, $65,000 for college. So what do you say to that?
Who wants to respond to that
I'd be happy,
among our college professionals?
well, I'd be
Yes.
happy to give it a shot. I think it's a fair criticism. There's a lot being written about colleges' inabilities to control their cost. That being said, a few points. One is the $65,000 issue. There are many, many other options than $65,000. And one of the things that our preoccupation with highly selective institutions and how the press covers it is people think that that's the norm. That is not the norm. So there are many, many other private and certainly most public institutions that cost much, much less. And as you've heard here, the actual cost versus price is much lower. So end the defensive part of the response and on to something else just quickly. What else are we doing? We actually have held our fees. Our tuitions at Leslie have gone up 3%, not 5, 6, or 7. We're committed to sticking to 3. We've kept our fees flat. We try and control the student housing and dining cost and keep those 3 or less. We're looking at a 3-year option that is now available for students going to our undergraduate Leslie College. We've done the finances on that so that students can take the January term and the 2 summer terms between their first and second and third year to do the equivalent of what is senior year. It also gives them the opportunity for 4-credit internships in the greater Boston, Cambridge area during those summers, many of which will pay. And for the January and summer terms, we charge the lower summer rate. So it's not even the regular senior year rate, so we've reduced it. So we're trying to look at that student experience that deals with time to degree, time either for graduate school or to the workforce, and it isn't a dramatic drop, but it is a drop in the total net cost for a student. So I think we need to do things like that, and I think as we look at other delivery models for students, especially online, that supplement or complement what's going on in the classroom, can we offer some of that at a lower credit? So I think besides institutional aid, we've got issues of how do we exploit technology for efficiency, which should affect the consumer, and how do we restructure ourselves in ways that can make sense to a variety of students that we serve.
How is UMass facing that, Jack?
Over the last 2 years, we've seen our state budget go from about $525 million to $379 million last year. Now, in spite of that, over the 8-year period, every year except last year, we had an increase that was under the cost of living. They were ranging around 3.5%. From year to year, and that just is, kind of handling the overall rise in energy prices and food prices and everything else. But when you take a hit from $525 million from the state to $379 million, you really have a challenge ahead of you. And so last year, what we decided to do was to close the gap half through increased revenues from a variety of sources. And that I mentioned UMass Online, I mentioned the commercialization of intellectual property, a variety of other kinds of things, and fees, and half in expense reductions. But you're really it's a difficult thing. Expenses at most colleges and universities are primarily salaries, and very heavily for faculty. Now, if you cut back on the faculty, which some states have done, California and Wisconsin, for instance, decided to cut back on those kinds of expenses, and then you had to turn around to the students and cut the enrollment as well. So they cut the enrollment in California. So lots of kids that want to go to school in California, are not going to go to the University of California now. At UMass, we saw this rising increase, and we said, with 31,500 students try to go to UMass, and with the other alternatives, and turning to us because we are the low-cost alternative in many ways for a research university in this region, should we turn away from that? Can we turn them down? Can we walk away? So we didn't decrease our enrollment. In fact, we increased our enrollment. But we did have to close a budget gap of over $100 million, and we did that by increasing the revenues, including increasing the fees last year more than the cost of living. And at the same time, we have, over the last few years, done a consolidation, for instance, of payroll and back office functions. They used to be done on each of the campuses. Now there's an old digital equipment building in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, selected because it's in the middle of the state, and employees that had been in Lowell or Amherst or Dartmouth could be transferred there. And we save about $20 million a year alone by consolidating back office functionality.
Excellent. Yes, Eileen.
It is important to note the difference between what's in the headline for tuition increases and what may be going on at individual college levels. We've seen a trend more recently that colleges are trying to keep their tuition increases to CPI or CPI +2 more in line with the U plan here in the state, so that the cost increases are more reasonable in line with the folks' ability to afford.
The CPI being the Consumer Price Index.